Good morning. Welcome to the Public Safety Committee. I'm your chair, Tom Amiano, and we do have one item on consent, which I'd like to have moved and voted. We need to establish a quorum, even though there's one right in front of my eyes. All right, let's do that with a roll call, please.
Amiano.
Here.
Hagman. Here. Furutani. Here. Gilmore. Hill. Here. Skinner.
All right, thank you very much. We do have one item, item number 6, Assemblyman Cook on consent, and Mr. Furutani moved, seconded, and without objection. Okay. All right, so that will be the order of business. And I see Colonel Cook in the audience. So, sir, if you want to come up and present number 5. Okay, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Members, this bill is AB 1828, and this will reestablish the Commission on Correctional Peace Officer Standards and Training, or as the acronym implies, CPOST, and will be responsible for the developing, approving, and monitoring standards for selection and training of state correctional peace officers. CPOST was abolished in 2005 during the reorganization of the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. For 10 years prior to the reorganization, CPOST ensured that the quality of training for correctional officers and was engaged in a long-term effort to improve the curriculum. Since the functions of CPOST were moved to the Correctional Standards Authority, CSA, in 2005, the quality of the correctional officer training has suffered. In fact, the Office of the Inspector General's 2006 audit of the authority found that the authority had failed almost entirely to conduct oversight of officer training to the point of the program being out of compliance with state and federal apprenticeship standards and leaving it at serious risk of being decertified. CSA, or the authority, is a cumbersome 19-member board with extremely broad responsibilities relating to state and local correctional systems. Oversight of the state correctional peace officer training program is only one of these responsibilities. This bill will reestablish the correct authority to follow through on the mandate for training standards. During the 10 years of its existence, CPOST made measurable improvements in the quality of correctional peace officer training. The bill also corrects a structural deficiency that existed in the initial iteration of CPOST, which at times resulted in management labor deadlocks, by adding a 7th member who must have at least 5 years' experience in a higher education environment providing instruction in either corrections or employee training. This correction will improve the function of CPOST by establishing a fair process for breaking stalemates between management and rank and file members of the Commission. Anyone with local government experience or different boards remembers the headaches where somebody was absent, you had an even number, and you're trying to come to a consensus or a vote, and you have that gridlock that takes place, and it's very, very frustrating to move forward. Training is essential to safety for staff and inmates in the correctional setting. The best way to develop and implement a valid training program is to ensure there is adequate input from both management and the rank and file officers who work in the correctional setting. This will accomplish these goals. And with me today is Craig Brown, representing CCPOA.
Craig Brown for the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. We're the sponsors of this bill. Colonel Cook more than adequately described the bill. I just want to add one thing. The C-Post functions as a joint apprenticeship council for purposes of federal apprenticeship laws, and therefore allows the state and labor to enter into contracts that give apprentices different pay, lower pay, allows you to use training time without paying overtime, and basically facilitates bringing new people into the profession at a much lower cost to the state than it would otherwise do. To be a federally certified joint apprenticeship council, it must be joint. Labor and management must have an equal voice. This structure has it. It's critical to the state being able to take advantage of those laws, and in fact, we're testing many of that right now because there is not a functioning joint apprenticeship council, and the state is in the process of defending many lawsuits from our members saying that they've been not paid overtime after 40 hours. If they were apprentices, there'd be no lawsuit. Everything would be fine. Without a joint apprenticeship council, the state costs are going to go up and the quality of training is going to go down. Thank you very much.
I have some questions. I'm going to support this today. I think it is necessary to have a high bar for training. We had another topic, the public safety, last year around training of BART, which is a public transportation commuter line in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and there's been some egregious lack of training on the part of their police force, which has resulted in a number of tragedies. So I think the committee is well versed in why something like this is necessary. And I understand, too, that you're trying with the seventh member to break a gridlock. I just wanted a couple of clarifications. The tenure of the seventh member is limited to a certain amount of months, and then the two groups of three actually vote on whether or not that person would continue, not the position, but the person. Is that correct?
Yeah, the intent is to have the intent's never to get to tiebreaker. We didn't need one for many years. I was management. We didn't need one for many, many years because labor and management got along. This was in response to basically legislative concerns and the concerns raised by the OIG. It sets up a typical binding arbitration kind of method of choosing. Labor nominates 5, management nominates 5. We knock them off each other's list. We're not wedded to any tenure. If the committee feels that the tenure needs to be longer than we've described in the bill, we're flexible.
All right.
We just want to make sure there is a tiebreaker and that there's an equal say in how he or she gets there.
Okay. I just didn't, I don't want it stacked. And a little bit, it would look like a little, this is fair, but when you look at who the participants are, there's a little gray area there. The other thing, and I'm not going to make any amendments today, but I do think, and I appreciate your try on this, to have all sides presented. And it makes sense to me that someone in advocating for the inmates would actually add balance to this commission. And as I said, this is a suggestion on my part. I'm going to support this as written, and I appreciate maybe we could work on that tenure issue before it goes to the floor if it gets out of committee. But those are my comments. And any other comments from committee members? Any support, further support? Any opposition? Sir.
Good morning. My name's Ford Knutt. I'm administrative liaison for the California Correctional Supervisors Organization, and we oppose this bill unless amended. Contrary to what's been said, management and the union didn't get along, and that's why we were a gridlock most of the time, and that's why C-Post failed to produce, and that's why it was abolished in 2005. The deterioration of the apprenticeship program started well before it was abolished. It was due to this gridlock. I'd like to point out that most peace officer post academies only have 1 or 2 union voting members. This bill is saying that a union will have equal number of voting power as the management, and that was part of the cause of the gridlock. And if they reduce the number of voting members from the union to 1 or 2, we would have no problem with the bill, other than the fact that we believe that the Correctional Standards Authority has not, they had 5 and 4 year studies going before producing lesson plans. They are just now starting to produce the lesson plans from those studies, and to take the job away from them this early would be a total waste of the last 5 years of work and giving it back to C-Post. And C-Post will take another year to get off the ground. So we'll have a big lag in training if we try to switch horses right now. So that, other than what we've already said in this document, that would be our main reason for opposing this.
All right, thank you, sir. Is there any committee members with questions for the opposition? All right, seeing none, Colonel Cook, would you like to close?
Yeah, you know, in my past life, I think everybody knows I was involved in the military. I was also part of I was the IG of a particular base. And one of the things that we're always interested in was training, you know, because that, quite frankly, contributes to what an organization is going to do in carrying out its mission. And it also contributes to the professionalism of the organization. So obviously I'm very, very interested in the bill from that standpoint. I cannot deny that, you know, the history of the friction between labor and management, and that is not to exacerbate that friction. I think there's enough there, but I do believe the realignment of the numbers in terms of the numerical odd number as opposed to the even is a common sense approach. I am very, very flexible, as is the sponsor in terms of amendments, and I welcome suggestions on how we can improve it. But in terms of the overall tenor of the bill, I think it's one which will raise the level of standards, improve the situation in an area that is always open to litigation, always open to scrutiny, and one which I think is very, very important. So I ask for your aye vote.
And just a question about the CSA. The oversight of training is not their only charge. Is that correct? They have other duties as well?
Our concern is that there's too many voting members on C-Posts that are represented by the union. We believe, like the sheriff's office and all the police posts, the union members are only one to 2 votes. In this bill, they have virtually half the votes.
We heard you. I was just curious as to the. I understood that the charge of the CSA, the 19-member board, has many duties, and one of them is oversight. I'm just clarifying. All right. If there are no further questions, the motion has been moved and seconded. We may have a roll call, please.
Amiano?
Aye.
Amiano, aye. Hagman? Hagman, aye. Furutani? Furutani, aye. Gilmore? Gilmore, aye. Hill? Hill, aye. Skinner? Vacancy. The bill is out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
All right. If we could have, I see Mr. Knight, Assemblymember Knight. Good morning.
Good morning. All eyes. Let's keep that trend going.
Would you like to open, sir?
I'm presenting today a very good, simple bill, AB 1607. Right now, existing law provides that anyone who defrauds a housing program of a public housing authority for more than $400 is guilty of grand theft. This bill would provide, in addition, that any public housing authority may require that any application or document filed with the public housing authority be signed and submitted under penalty of perjury. Practical difficulties of proof have made this a difficult law to enforce, with the result being that undesirable and destructive tenants remain in public housing and cause hardship for other law-abiding public housing tenants. We want eligible, deserving, honest individuals and families taking advantage of Section 8 housing. We owe it to the residents of low-income housing who follow the rules, who obey the laws, who are simply doing their best, given their financial situation, to provide them a community that is free from exploitation and destructive elements. The intent of this bill is not to dissuade good and decent families from applying for housing. Our aim is quite the opposite. The waiting list for public housing vouchers is extremely long. San Bernardino County alone, there are 28,000 people on this waiting list. These are disabled, elderly, single-parent families patiently waiting on this list. By weeding out a nefarious element, we hope to provide worthy families with an assistance they so greatly need. Basically, what this bill does is if you're on the Section 8 program and you're following the rules, your voucher stays in place. When you apply and when you sign that application, again, we expect that by signing that, you have stated that you have not defrauded this program, that you have not used this program for criminal element. This is exactly what our single parent families need. This is exactly what the people that are on the waiting list want. They don't want the people that are in there using Section 8 for criminal activity to be in front of them, to be holding a spot when people that can use Section 8 properly could use it. I ask for your aye vote.
All right, thank you, sir. I just wanted to clarify, is this particularly aimed at an applicant and providing false information on the application form? Is that
well,
the scope of this?
in essence, but yes, you can't. In what we're trying to accomplish is by signing this, you're stating that you haven't defrauded the program. So, yes, partially that's correct.
Right, but then we don't know the intent. I mean, we fill out a lot of forms here that we're told by the Rules Committee that we're, you know.
Absolutely, and an investigation
that kind
would.
of duress, yeah. And then with electronic filing now, too. I mean, if, you know, I'm just thinking that it's a little broad in my mind, but I'd be willing to, ma'am, if you wanted to present.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Lieutenant Barbara Ferguson, representing San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. I'm also here on behalf of the California Peace Officers Association, who is the sponsor of this bill, and we are supporting it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions, Mr. Hagman, sir?
I just want to make sure I understand. Basically, you're declaring penalty perjury that the information on the application is correct.
Yes.
So if there is fraud, which there is fraud, and the DA's already going after these cases, it's a basically easier process. You don't have to have two penal code sections that are going across. You have one that's amended to fit this particular activity.
And let me clarify. I think some of the part of this this bill has been said that we're creating a new law. We absolutely are not.
Just adding it on the.
The problem is, you know, in my district in the Antelope Valley, we were two of the first cities. In fact, we had the first city to do enforcement of Section 8. Section 8 had gotten out of control, that people were using this for not the intent of Section 8. So we have an enforcement team. The purpose of this is to give them a little bit more investigative tool and to make sure that the people that are under Section 8 are properly using it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Knight, I guess what I'm having a hard time understanding is, you know, the current, I guess, statement or when you sign the application is pretty conclusive in terms of, you know, that if you're misrepresenting something, if you're filing a false statement, or if you're doing anything that's incorrect in this, it's punishable by a fine or imprisonment. And I guess I'm trying to figure out what is the added benefit of the perjury part, other than it could add a couple years to a sentence, perhaps, at the end of the day.
Well, and I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit here, Assembly Member. You can sign that application in many parts across this state. There is no penalty. There is nothing that would happen to you that you by signing that application. There is nothing that would happen. By placing this by penalty of perjury, you are stating that you have not defrauded this voucher program.
But if you do defraud the voucher program, it's
If you
punishable.
have defrauded the voucher program.
But if you do in the future,
Well, again, there's going to be another application, so you're always under this umbrella.
okay.
You're continually signing under perjury.
Thank you, Mr. Knight.
Any other committee member questions? I see Mr. Lavelle for support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is John Lovell, and I'm here on behalf of the California Peace Officers Association. My esteemed colleague, Ms. Ferguson, has already testified on their behalf, but also on behalf of the police chiefs and the narcotic officers. Let me tell you a story about why...
Not a long story, sir.
A short story, a Reader's Digest story, about why this bill is important. In 1965, I worked as a trash trunk swamper for Rio Honda trash collection, where you ride on the back of the trucks. And my driver was a guy named Lico Perez, a very good friend of mine. And he lived in the William Meade Homes in Los Angeles, public housing projects, raising a wife and several children. And there were a lot of problems in the area where he lived, with some fairly scary people. I, at the same time, had an apartment, private apartment, where I had a pain-in-the-ass tenant or neighbor, and during the course of the summer, I moved and got another place. And I remember saying to Lico, I said, Lico, you can leave, move out. You don't have to deal with these people. He said, John, you don't understand. By the dint of my economic circumstance, I am anchored in this neighborhood, and I am anchored at William Meade's, and every day it takes an act of courage for me to send my children to the store to buy bread. A bill like Mr. Knight's bill will give to management in public housing a tool to deal with those disruptive, those threatening tenants who terrorize all the others who are there by dint of their economic circumstance. This is a very, very, very good bill, and I would commend the committee to move this bill on to the next committee, because otherwise the poor will always be in public housing and by dint of their circumstance
All right, sir.
be subject to all of this
Thank you.
nonsense.
I remind the committee that this bill is about perjury. All right, do we have any opposition? Please take a seat.
Valerie Small Navarro with the American Civil Liberties Union, and I would just briefly say that if tenants are terrorizing or destroying property or making their co-tenants miserable, there are plenty of tools at the hands of the landlord to go after that tenant. In addition, current law, and it's in the bill, current law already provides that if the person is defrauding the public housing agency for more than $400, the person is guilty of grand theft. And as you all know, that's a felony penalty with time in prison if that's what the judge decides. So I would suggest to you that if the concern is dealing with people who are terrorizing other tenants, that there are other means to go after those tenants, and it's not appropriate to impose more felony penalties than what are already in place. In addition, just a footnote, I think the bill, even if you agreed with the bill, it's truly overbroad, because it requires that every single document that some tenant fills out, the statement regarding the conditions in the property, whether the refrigerator is running, all the stuff, any wrong answer on that would qualify under this bill. So I would suggest to you that even if you agree with the bill, it still needs quite a bit of work, and I urge a no vote.
Christine Menahan on behalf of the Western Center on Law and Poverty. We are opposed to the bill. We are unable, however, like Ms. Small, to understand the rationale for the bill. Federal law already allows public housing agencies to include much, much stronger language on the forms regarding perjury. San Francisco's PHA law is very, very typical of the public housing authorities in California, and it states, very briefly, that the requirement in San Francisco is typical. It certifies that all information given above is true and complete, and that the tenant understands that they are signing under perjury and that they will be prosecuted. So we think that the federal law and the state law already provides the ability to pursue perjurers. But I want to go one step further, if I might. We do not understand the nexus between removing troublesome and disruptive tenants. What is the nexus between filing a form under perjury and removing that tenant from the waiting list or from the property? Tenants throughout the state are on the waiting list for many months, most often years. People can wait up to 10 years to get the property. There's adequate time during that period that they're on the waiting list to have done the full examination of the background of that person. In fact, all people on housing authority lists are investigated before they are able to file on the list. That's one of the ways that we have worked with landlords to ensure that the people that are being sent out with Section 8 vouchers or with the ability to live in the public housing buildings is that we are sending out tenants that have clean records and that will be able to lawfully live in the unit. We ask for your no vote.
Liberty Sanchez on behalf of the California Public Defenders Association. I want to underscore the comments made by my colleagues, and one brief point additionally. These forms are hugely complicated, very lengthy. Many of the applicants are limited English speakers, have no reading or writing skills, and there's very limited assistance in filling these forms out. So an inadvertent oversight or mistake might lead to a potential felony violation and prison time for inadvertently leaving something out on one of these forms, and this would dissuade, needy applicants who made no mistake other than making a mistake on the form, dissuade them from even applying, let alone seeking housing. So for those reasons, we are opposed to this measure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And Mr. Gilmore?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real briefly, I think the author of the bill was right on the mark, and you, Mr. Chair, as well. This is about perjury, plain and simple. The author, Assemblymember Knight, stated that in his opening comment. It's a real simple deal. When we sign contracts, whether you're we're all the time signing under the penalty of perjury. Simply, this provides a prosecutor in a case. It simplifies it. Other than currently they're using two separate penal code sections to prosecute these individuals. This streamlines the process, clearly stating on it that you're signing under the penalty of perjury. It's done all the time. It simplifies it. It's a simple bill, and I support it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments from the committee? All right, seeing there's a move. Is there a second? And a second, would you like to, I'll make some comments, but would you like to close?
Certainly. I appreciate the discussion here. This is a bill that we brought forward because, this problem is statewide. But in the Antelope Valley, the area that I represent, we have an increasing situation where our investigators have their hands tied, and it's unfortunate. Section 8 was a program to help people. It was a program that was designed to give people that were down on their luck, that had a financial situation that needed some help from the government. Section 8 came along and was supposed to provide that. Unfortunately, some people see this as a gateway for criminal activity to use this to do with whatever they want. They terrorize communities, they prey on the innocent, and unfortunately, because of that, it gives Section 8 a bad name. Section 8 shouldn't have a bad name. Section 8 should be one of those programs that help people. By doing this, you give them that tool that weeds out some of these characters that are trying to hurt the community. This is a very, very simple way of doing that. Just in our area alone, we have over 100,000 people waiting to get on Section 8. Now, some of those people are going to use it for criminal activity, but most of those people need this program. So if we can get rid of some of these people that are using it for criminal activity and get some of those single mothers on Section 8 that probably will use it correctly, then I think that would be the correct thing to go. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, we do have a motion and a second. I just like to tell a little story, too. Can't compete with the yarn spinning of Mr. Lovell, perhaps, but I taught school in San Francisco from the late 60s through the 90s. Many of my students lived in public housing. They were lovely families. We had many programs there for the families who did not have the financial wherewithal for enrichment activities. You know, we were young teachers. We felt very, very committed, and we also felt extremely safe. Over the years, public housing became, for a variety of reasons, a little more dangerous. And one of the ways we came up in San Francisco to deal with it was not this let's get tough on a crime attitude towards something like filling out a form. God bless you. Filling out, if you're dyspeptic, I would recommend some Maalox or something. We have tenant and landlord groups. They meet weekly. There's elections. People deal with the improprieties that may or may not occur. People have a say in their own self-determination. There are a variety of city services provided to make sure that some of the referrals in my mind, this is a much more democratic, less punitive way that can still get at the problem. It seems to me that if this bill creates a felony punishable by state prison for 2 to 3 or 4 years, tremendous cost of going through this process alone should have a step back. Is this really the kind of crime that deserves that kind of penalty? Connecting a crime like this, if it is in fact a crime, a misapplication to terrorism, I think is a stretch. Sir, I'm going to ask you to leave if you keep sneezing. So I don't see any good rationale for this bill. If a resident is defrauding Public Housing Authority of $400 or more, the resident is already guilty of grand theft. The bill is only going to serve to catch people who lie on their applications, which usually does not rise to the level of a crime. This bill could cause innocent people to lose out on an opportunity to live in affordable housing because they wrongly marked a box on the application when they moved in. Or worse, it could discourage applicants who really need this housing. Unfortunately, I will not support this bill and will recommend a no vote, and I'd like a roll call, please.
Amiano?
No.
Amiano, no. Hagman? Hagman, aye. Furutani? Furutani not voting. Gilmore? Gilmore, aye. Hill? Hill, no. Skinner? Vacancy? Bill's on call.
All right. The bill is on call. Thank you, everyone. And Mr. Hagman, I think you're up. All right, Mr. Hagman, we're going to go to the zoo.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we'll go through this too much, but again, sometimes we, in order to protect the rights of of our residents, sometimes we make things more complicated than they need to be. And that's kind of what happened with the trespassing laws. We didn't want to make it too broad to catch people that we didn't want to catch, and we found out there's some kind of loophole in our zoos. So Assembly Bill 1675 makes it a misdemeanor for anyone to enter animals enclosure at a zoo or aquarium without the approval of the zoo or the aquarium. You would think that'd already be a problem or be something that we don't have to do with these fences and stuff, but it does happen. AB 1675 adds a section to the trespassing law making it illegal to enter animal enclosure at a zoo or aquarium without authority. It does not apply to employees of the zoo. Thank you. We got to move. And basically, real briefly, I'll introduce one of my guest speakers here is the Vice President for Institutional Advancement at San Francisco Zoo, Bob Jenkins, who's also here for answering any questions we may have. And I believe the City of San Francisco has already passed this ordinance as an ordinance, but it's happening. The copycats throughout different zoos. It's not a great frequency. We're not going to send a ton of people over to our prisons by any means, but hopefully it'll keep the animals safe and keep our zoo participants safe from trying to get crazy and jump over if a panda bear or something.
All right, sir.
So just real quick, I think the news reports and what the Assemblyman has noted today speaks for the situation. I do want to point out that the entire situation was resolved in less than 5 minutes by the staff at the San Francisco Zoo. It was resolved without injury to the intruder, the animals, the staff, the police department, or our visitors. It presented a very dangerous situation for us. Our armed response team had to respond to the situation. We did have to fire a warning shot to keep the bear away from the individual. But again, it was all resolved very quickly and very professionally.
The mental health issue, correct?
Pardon?
It was a mental health issue on the part.
That was one part of the situation. There was the entry as well. You can imagine then the dismay and probably shock of our staff when we found out that the charge of criminal trespass had been dismissed because, quite simply put, the individual had not chosen to live in the exhibit with the grizzly bears, what have you. These kinds of situations can occur with zoos and aquariums. I would note that California has the largest concentration of zoos and aquariums of any state in the United States. It also has the largest concentration of institutional members with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. The importance of this is that the individual, had he not had outstanding warrants here in Sacramento for other situations, could have left the courtroom that day, returned to the zoo, and re-entered the bear exhibit immediately, and then we would have then been powerless to prevent that as well. Other states have laws similar to this that prevent this kind of behavior, this kind of activity. Most recently, you may have heard of a woman at a Wisconsin facility that had her hand or her fingers bitten off by a bear in an enclosure. Essentially, she had crossed public barriers to get there and what have you. She has been charged with criminal trespass in that state. And I only conclude by urging you to pass this bill. Thank you.
This was to my knowledge, the second incident at the San Francisco Zoo. The first one was very tragic and did result in the death of one of the patrons who was alleged to be provoking the tiger at the time. In terms of a law like this, I think you're right. I think we should have had something on the books. But also the other part of it is, and we were just talking about training, is the training of the staff at the San Francisco Zoo, which really, I thought, really reached a high bar. I think the people there been to the zoo, are completely dedicated and committed. But along with a law like this, too, I think we have to continue always to evaluate because even the anticipated, in some ways, can be anticipated with the right training. So, I mean, I see a joint effort here. I'm also thinking that, we do have an ordinance in San Francisco. This is rare. I'm going to stay off this, leave it up to the committee what to do. But I did want to register those comments. Ma'am, are you here in support as well?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. Julianne Burrows here on behalf of the California Association of Joint Powers Authorities. We are the group that provides risk management training, safety issues, as well as insurance for school districts and special districts that include zoos. We strongly support AB 1675. We think it's an important new tool in our toolbox to deal with those people who ignore posted warnings and enter enclosures where there are wild animals or aquatic life. We also think it will reduce our exposure in public entity lawsuits in the future. I would ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, ma'am, very much. Any opposition? There's none from the animals, I see, so.
Just real briefly, Mr. Chair, and one of the things, too, this is a program. This is not just, we got to remember that a lot of times we pass laws not to go after somebody for doing wrong behavior that we think is wrong, but it's really to try to prevent it. This is a law that also prevents it as well. There will be signs at the entrance of the zoo that going into enclosures is trespassing. So they'll add preventive measures for the patrons who go through the entrances of the zoos to make sure that they know this is, you would think it's be obvious, but it's not to certain individuals that this is wrong activity. We're going to come after you if you do something wrong. It's really for the protection of the patrons that come to the zoo, as well as the animals, as well, and the staff members who have to deal with it. So I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I forgot about Mr. Fertani. My apologies.
Just a quick question,
Yes, sir.
the obvious, but other trespassing laws don't cover this then?
Correct. There's 4 different elements to prove trespassing, and you have to have a certain amount of time, disrupt business, you want to reside there. If you don't prove at least one of those 4 elements in it, in this particular case and other cases where someone hops over the fence to try to do something, whatever, it does not fall to those standards. So it's difficult to get a misdemeanor conviction even for an act if you don't intend to stay there or disrupt the business. I think there's 4 different points here. That's why it didn't fit, and that's why with this particular environment with the zoos and aquariums that they need a tweak. So it's just strictly, it's very, very minor bill, strictly towards zoos and aquariums here in California.
Okay. I think we have a motion. Did we get a second? Second. And if we may have a roll call, please.
Amiano?
Off.
Amiano not voting. Hagman? Hagman, aye. Furutani? Furutani, aye. Gilmore? Gilmore, aye. Hill? Hill, aye. Skinner? Skinner, aye. Vacancy?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Solorio. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you like to present, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair and members. This bill is a follow-up to AB 900, the Public Safety and Offender Rehabilitation Services Act of 2007, which authorized $7.4 billion in lease revenue bond financing for construction of new state prison beds and county jail beds. Under current law, what we found is that many counties, large and small, were not awarded county jail construction funding under Phase 1 due to requirements related to process, siting, operational constraints, or not meeting the financial match, which under this economic situation is difficult. Therefore, in the current phase, there's $132 million still available. And for Phase 2, there's another $470 million available. However, if we don't alter the criteria, we'll likely see counties, again, large and small, not be able to qualify for this jail bond money. This bill would provide another eligibility option for counties to qualify for AB 900 funds by granting equal preference points to counties if they agree to provide their own reentry beds at their facilities to state prison inmates in their community instead of citing a state reentry facility in their county. In order to receive the preference points, large counties would need to provide a certain number of beds, and smaller counties would need to provide 1 reentry bed for every bed that they would build. Not only would this bill help the state reach its goals of providing reentry beds, it would also be more cost effective because it's more cost effective for locals to provide these services. And finally, at a time that the state keeps transferring inmates that the state would typically house, we're shifting more and more of that responsibility to locals. This would help locals with having extra capacity to accommodate that. I do have representatives in support from the Sheriff's Association as well as the County of Orange, and I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, sir. All right. In support?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Louis Brown on behalf of the California State Sheriff's Association. We want to thank the author for his leadership on this issue and thank the committee for working with us. This is an example that will strengthen the partnership between local law enforcement and the states. These new eligibility requirements are much needed in order for us to get Phase 2 money out to the counties and to address some of the corrections issues that we have around the state. Therefore, we ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Holly Firmini on behalf of the Orange County Board of Supervisors. Even though we don't have an official position on this version of the bill, we've been in strong support conceptually of creating some options for the department and granting these awards. We were one of the large urban counties who we had to give back our conditional award, and we're trying to work out these siting issues. So we hope that we can take a few technical amendments in the future to this bill that will satisfy our concerns, but we strongly support this bill moving forward.
Thank you. Next speaker in support.
Tim Yarian with the Association for Los Angeles Deputy Sheriffs. We support the sheriff's and Sheriff Baca's position on this bill for the reasons stated by the author. Thank you.
Mr. Lovell in support.
John Lovell on behalf of the California Peace Officers Association, California Police Chiefs Association, and California Narcotic Officers Association. I'll dispense with any stories and indicate that we're in support.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, I'm Jim Votes on behalf of the LA County Professional Peace Officers Association and the California Fraternal Order of Police, also in support.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker.
Liberty Sanchez on behalf of the California Public Defenders Association. We have a support if amended position. The two amendments that we brought to the attention of the author's office were specifying that jails that are cited as reentry facilities be required to permanently dedicate drug treatment modules within the jails, and also that the wraparound services provided by the jail under these sections are evaluated each year and certified as evidence-based. It's my understanding that the author is looking into the possibility of addressing those amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any opposition? All right, seeing none, Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for bringing this bill back. I do have just a couple questions. One, I believe the governor vetoed this last year. One of the questions was define the long term. And I'm wondering if that's even stronger in this bill. I'm just wondering what's going to prevent him from vetoing it again this year.
Sure. Last year he did veto it for reasons that the office had not shared with us earlier, as well as there's some other AB 900 fixes that the governor would like to see, so he really wanted a more comprehensive package. For this year, I'll tell you, this bill is moving forward largely in the format it is, and you'll be seeing a separate bill that addresses all the other AB 900 fixes, so we think we're being responsive to the governor. With respect to this bill, we've been talking to CDCR, and what they want to help define is what we mean by long term, which we're more than happy to satisfy. We think maybe the length of the bonds might be a good concrete time for that. The other thing that we're going to further define is what scope of services, and that's what the Public Defender's Office also spoke about. So what services are we talking about, and what type of space associated with the delivery of those services. So as we move forward, we actually have a meeting with the CDCR and the governor's staff again this Thursday to specify that, and I'd be more than happy to do that. Last year we were wanting to do that, but at the time they thought flexibility was good, and now we want more specificity.
Well, I'll be happy to move this bill, Mr. Chair, but the second question I have is, in some of our counties, they're definitely impacted with pretrial services where they're already capacity, and if we're going to be subsidizing one bed for another, so to speak, for income purposes or something, I'm just want to put that as a caution that we try not to mix up our missions to make sure that we're keeping the public safe in whatever combination of beds we use. But look forward to your changes in that, and I'll move the bill.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions for the author?
If I could just thank the author for bringing this back this year again. So.
No, thank you. Thank you.
And Ms. Delaria, would you like to close?
Given we have such a fine new chair for this committee and excellent analysis by the staff,
I move
comments and questions, I ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Slario, I will support this bill today. I am encouraged that the bill would establish more beds for reentry without building new facilities. But the big picture here is I'd rather see our efforts spent on eliminating determinate sentencing, which has caused our prisons to become so overcrowded in the first place. But I would be happy to give this an aye vote.
Thank you.
All right. And we have a roll call, please.
Amiano?
Aye.
Amiano, aye. Hagman?
Aye.
Hagman, aye. Furutani? Aye. Furutani, aye. Gilmore?
Aye.
Gilmore, aye. Hill?
Aye.
Hill, aye. Skinner? Aye. Skinner, aye. Vacancy?
The bill is out.
Thank you.
All right. I'll ask the Vice Chair to take over as I present my bill.
Mr. Chair, please present your bill.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and members. AB 1706 is a simple measure that amends existing law, Penal Code 1000, granting courts greater discretion to determine whether a defendant charged with crimes related to use of controlled substances should be eligible for deferred entry of judgment and directed into a drug diversion program. AB 1706 simply authorizes a court at a defendant's request to review the prosecuting attorney's determination of ineligibility for deferred entry of judgment and authorizes the court to make the final determination as to eligibility. The bill clarifies that judges must use the same criteria as the prosecuting attorney when considering eligibility for deferred entry, removing opposition of the Los Angeles District Attorneys Association. Today I have with me Mr. Ignacio Hernandez to testify in support of the bill on behalf of the sponsor of the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Ignacio Hernandez, on behalf of CACJ, we are the sponsors of this measure. And, you know, really, before I jump into the substance, let me tell you, I've been working on criminal justice policy here in some capacity in the last 11 years. And I can tell you this bill really addresses a absurd expenditure of state resources. And it's one thing we really didn't talk about last year. The way the current law works is that when someone is eligible or may be eligible for DEJ, where we're trying to get them into drug treatment instead of putting them into jail, everyone seems to be in agreement that that program is good and it works. It's a very narrow category of individuals. But what's absurd is that if there is a disagreement as to whether someone is eligible or not, the judge can review that decision, but that's only if someone is granted DEJ and by the DA, and the judge wants to look at it again and says, well, maybe this person should go to jail instead of getting DEJ. The absurdity is that the flip, if the defendant thinks that the denial of deferred entry of judgment was erroneous, they can't ask the judge that's sitting right in front of him or her. They can't tell the judge, well, wait a minute, the DA thinks that my prior makes me ineligible, but that there's actually inaccuracy about that. The judge can look at it and say, I agree with you, I have no authority. That person has to go through trial, get convicted, and then file in the Court of Appeals for this low-level offense, making a decision whether to go to DEJ or just go through the normal process. The judge who's sitting right in front of everyone cannot make the decision. All this bill does is create one extra opportunity to review this file. The judge who's sitting right in front of everyone has the file in his or her hand, can just look at it and say, you know what, this person should be eligible for DEJ. That's all this bill does, and it would save a lot of resources from having to go to the Court of Appeals, who are already inundated with lots of cases. So it's a very balanced measure. It saves money, and it gets people into programming when they deserve it, and it just really helps fix any types of problems without spending so many resources to go to the Court of Appeals to ask for your support.
Mr. Vice Chair, I'll move the bill.
Any questions at this point? We got a motion second. Any other questions? I do have a couple. Just bring up the process. I mean, who's eligible, who's not? Is that fairly clearly defined?
There are several factors that are listed in the statute. It states certain offenses, certain history are excluded. And so where there are discrepancies, I mean, that's very specific. It's laid out and you can't go outside of that. Where there are discrepancies, there's an interpretation of certain prior cases. For example, it says that if there's a case that involves violence, you are excluded. But if you have a prior offense where the charge is not violent, but maybe some of the surrounding facts could be construed as being violent, that's where the disagreement takes place. So yes, they're very specific, very narrow, but there can be disagreement on how to interpret some of the facts from prior offenses, and that's the cases that we have seen up and down the state when I've talked to some of our members in LA, in Orange County, San Diego, and Fresno. A number of our attorneys have said, we have disagreements with the DA, and we have no way to address this with the judge that's in front of us.
And if a DA, if a particular individual district attorney is overshooting the bounds and not interpreting these things, is there judicial remedies against that particular district attorney?
If I'm understanding the question,
it's like contempt of court, judicial review, anything that you can use to
like an appeal
interpretation of wrongly on a repeated pattern.
If the DA's decision is to grant DEJ and they're made a mistake, the judge who's sitting in front of the case at that moment can overrule the DA. If the DA decides that someone is ineligible and they've made a mistake, the only remedy is to go up to the Court of Appeals, and that entire process, which is extremely costly. We're not taking away that process. We're just saying maybe it could be resolved at the trial court level in 90 seconds.
Any other witnesses in support? Not witnesses in opposition.
Mr. Chair and members, Corey Salzillo on behalf of the California District Attorneys Association. Unfortunately, we are in opposition to this bill again this year, which is nearly identical to the bill as it was vetoed last year. We're not exactly clear if anything's changed. I don't have any reason to believe that the governor's office has changed their mind. The bulk of our opposition has been discussed already, but basically, as Mr. Hernandez said, there are 6 criteria that the prosecutor looks at to determine eligibility for the program. Not amenability, but eligibility. 4 of those are very clear. They're based on the record. 2, whether or not the crime involves some level of violence or threat of violence, or whether or not there's other evidence of a controlled substance violation, are the only judgment calls, if you will. But the prosecutor has no incentive to fudge or to not be more than truthful on that, because they can face a contempt of court order. So we're in opposition.
John Lovell, California Narcotic Officers Association, opposed for the reasons previously indicated.
Thank you. Any other questions up here? Please, Mrs. Skinner.
Question to the opposition. It's not clear to me how this bill, how should I put it, steps on the jurisdiction of the DA or the prosecutor. So I know you just explained the opposition, but I'm having a hard time appreciating it, because it doesn't. The judge, all it is asking is that the judge have the ability to, in the instance, review the file and make a determination.
I'm not sure that I would characterize it as stepping on the prosecutor's jurisdiction. I mean, it does call into question potentially the integrity of the prosecutor's decision in that regard if the judge says, no, you're wrong. But I think the issue is that it's potentially an unnecessary step that could be used in any case in which the defendant does not get the eligibility determination he or she is looking for, to ask the judge, well, can you review this? And I'm not sure that the case has been made to add that extra step. I mean, Mr. Hernandez mentioned multiple cases up and down the state, but this is not, I'm not hearing that prosecutors are dealing with these decisions getting appealed quite a bit.
Well, I would imagine they might not be just given the backlog in the courts, you know, how the length of time before such an appeal would even be heard. I mean, from my point of view, independent of what the supporters indicated, just assisting the backlog in our courts seems to me an argument in favor of this approach.
I'm sorry, would you like me to respond to the Mr. Chair? Okay. I guess I would argue that, as I said, the 6 criteria that are in question are not necessarily difficult things to determine. 2/3 of them are yes or no questions. Does the person have a prior felony offense in the last 5 years? Yes or no. Those 4 things are very easy to determine. The other 2 are not confusing, and if there's a disagreement, I guess you could have a disagreement, but I'm just not sure that it's going to save enough time on the front end to save the time on the back end. I'm not sure how many people actually do appeal. So our folks, when they looked at this, did not see this as something that's going to eliminate backlogs. So.
Thank you. Just if I can maybe, Mr. Chair, follow up with a couple questions here too. If this is same as the last year's bill that got vetoed, do you have any significant changes in there that hopefully that will amend that? And then secondly, is there somewhere between what we have now in a court of appeals that may be a process issue? Maybe it can be appealed to the presiding judge of the court, or some kind of process in the world of alcohol in the appellate court.
This version does clarify that the judge has to use the same criteria as the prosecuting attorney. Then I'll have you answer the second part.
Yeah, on your second question, I think that, if I understood it correctly, I think that's exactly what this bill does. Is it is an intermediate step between the DA's decision and the Court of Appeals. It's saying the judge who's handling the case the defense can ask the judge to review the decision of the DA. Those two factors generally is where it's going to be, where there's some disagreement, and that's really all it does. The judge already has that authority to review essentially suitability for the DEJ. If the DA decides that someone is eligible, then under current statute, the sitting judge, right then and there, can look at it and say, well, I understand that the person may be eligible technically, but there are some other factors I'm concerned about. So judges already play that role, but that same judge can't look at that file and say, well, you know what, I think this person should be in program. It's, it's first offense, it's this and that, all these other factors indicate. So this is an intermediate step. Without this bill, we can only go to the Court of Appeal.
I understand that, but I also know from dealing 20 years in the criminal court system that there's a lot of poker played in some of those things. A lot of deals are made between the district attorney and the defense counsel. And if you have one side or the other, some of those tools, some of those methods on both sides, frankly, from the criminal defense attorneys or the district attorneys, cannot be played. That's why I thought maybe another intermediate step outside that physical courtroom may be more appropriate than to take away some of those tools from one side or the other with inside that courtroom on that case at that time.
Sure.
Since it doesn't happen all that very much, it may be something to look at down the road.
Just a clarifying question. Help me if you would. If this bill was enacted into law, the prosecutor makes a recommendation to the court. The court then reviews it and makes a decision to overrule the prosecutor. There would be nothing in place here for the prosecutor then in turn to make an appeal on the judge's decision. Is that correct?
For the eligibility.
On the eligibility, as it's written, that's correct. In the same way that there isn't an opportunity for the DA to go to the Court of Appeals or go higher than that. Yeah, I mean their role would be in the Court of Appeals.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that a suggested amendment that they can file with the Court of Appeals? We'd be open to that.
Any other witnesses in opposition? If not, Mr. Chair, please conclude.
Yeah, I just wanted to reemphasize that the bill does clarify that the judges must use the same criteria as the prosecuting attorney, and that resulted in the opposition being removed by the Los Angeles District Attorney Association. And right now, the defendant cannot challenge a denial of eligibility until there is a conviction and then go to the Court of Appeals. And I would ask respectfully for an aye vote. And I think we've had a very good discussion. I appreciate it.
You call the roll.
Amiano?
Aye.
Amiano, aye. Hagman? No. Hagman, no. Furutani? Aye. Furutani, aye. Gilmore? No. Gilmore, no. Hill? Aye. Hill, aye. Skinner? Aye. Skinner, aye. Vacancy?
Bill's out.
All right, we have a couple on call. Okay. Mr. Knight's Bill 1607 on call. Ms. Skinner, was it? All right, if we can call the absentees, please.
Skinner?
Eight, yeah.
Skinner, no. Vacancy?
Yes. If the bill fails and there's been a request for reconsideration, that's been granted without objection. And that's it. So the meeting, and thank you everyone, the meeting is adjourned.